I am honored to introduce Sigrid Nunez to all of you. She's the author of 8 books and has been a contributor to several publications, including the New York Times, the Paris Review, and McSweeney's. She has won a Whiting Writers Award, a Berlin Prize Fellowship, and 2 awards from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Tonight, she will be talking about her most recent work, The Friend, which won the 2018 National Book Award for Fiction. The Friend is a novel that documents the journey of grief experienced by an unnamed narrator after the sudden suicide of her lifelong friend and mentor. She finds herself responsible with the care of his dog, a Great Dane, Apollo, loyally heartbroken over the disappearance of his former owner. Our narrator, in her grief, becomes wholly consumed with Apollo's care. The Friend is a poignant journey into the complexities of loss in only 200 pages. However, despite its weight, it is also a celebration of loyalty, friendship, and art. With grace and subtlety, Nunez explores what it means to be a writer, to be a woman, and to be wrapped up in the intricacies of our relationships, both with each other and with our animals. Everyone, let us all welcome Sigrid Nunez.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernard, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to read two short sections from the novel and then hope that you'll have some questions so we can have a discussion. Did you read about the Tibetan Mastiffs? I had indeed read the article in the Times, and I say so, but the woman's need to vent is too great. She tells the story anyway. Only a few years ago in China, the Tibetan Mastiff was a status symbol, a luxury item priced at the equivalent of an average of $200,000, with some puppies said to sell for more than $1 million. As the mania peaked, more and more dogs were produced by grasping breeders. Then the mania died. Worth too little, eating too much, the huge and sometimes hard to control dogs were no longer wanted. What came next? Mass abandonment. Dogs packed into transport trucks where they suffered horribly and many died. The slaughterhouse. Truly not a story I needed to hear twice. The woman is someone Apollo and I often meet when she's out walking her own 2 dogs, gentle mutts, mother and daughter. From the news story, she goes into her screed. It too is something she's shared with me before, about the evils of dog breeding. Mutts are what nature intended. Mutts are what should exist. But what have we got instead? Idiot collies, neurotic shepherds, murderous Rottweilers, deaf Dalmatians, and labs so calm you could shoot a gun at them and they wouldn't suspect danger. Fur vegetables, cripples, morons, sociopaths, dogs with bones too thin or flesh too fat. That's what you get when you breed dogs for the traits people want them to have. It should be a crime. I thought this woman was crazy when she told me about pointers that freeze in point posture and then can't get out. But this grotesquerie turns out to be fact. I shudder to think what it'll be like 50 or 100 years from now, says the woman, looking very dark indeed. But by then, she adds, the whole world will have been destroyed. And perhaps consoled by this thought, she takes her mutts and moves on. I am left thinking about the Mastiffs. Besides their great bulk and a mane that makes them look part lion, they are known for being fiercely protective and loyal to their masters. So what does a dog bred for those traits feel when its master lets it be herded onto one of those transport trucks? Does a dog understand betrayal? I think probably not. I think the main thing on the Mastiff's mind all the way to the slaughterhouse is, who will protect master now? A digression. About animal suffering, what do we really know? There is evidence that dogs and other animals have a higher tolerance for pain than humans do, but their true capacity for suffering, like the true measure of their intelligence, must remain a mystery. The writer J.R. Ackerley believed that being so emotionally involved with people and trying forever to please them made a dog's life chronically anxious and stressed. But did they get headaches, he wondered? Not even that much about them being known. Another question, why do people often find animal suffering harder to accept than the suffering of other human beings? Take Robert Graves, writing about the Somme. The number of dead horses and mules shocked me. Human corpses were all very well, but it seemed wrong for animals to be dragged into the war like this. Why, of all the terrible memories of his ordeal as a POW in Japan during World War II, was Olympic athlete and U.S. Army Airman Louis Zamperini most haunted by the memory of a guard torturing a duck? Of course, in each of these cases, the suffering was caused by human behavior. In the case of the duck, an act of pure sadism. But aren't animals always at our mercy? And doesn't the pity we feel for them have to do with our understanding that the animal itself has no way of knowing the reason for its pain? A fact that makes some people insist that animals must suffer even worse than humans do. I believe the intensity of the pity you feel for an animal has to do with how it evokes pity for yourself. I believe we must all retain, throughout our whole lives, a powerful memory of those early moments of life, a time when we were as much animal as human, the overwhelming feelings of helplessness and vulnerability and mute fear, and the yearning for the protection that our instinct tells us is there if we could just cry loudly enough. Innocence is something we humans pass through and leave behind, unable to return. But animals live and die in that state. And seeing innocence violated in the form of cruelty to a mere duck can seem like the most barbaric act in the world. I know people who are outraged by this sentiment, calling it cynical, misanthropic, and perverse. But I believe the day when we are no longer capable of feeling it will be a terrible day for every living being, that our downward slide into violence and barbarity will be only that much quicker. And now I'm reading from a section that comes quite a bit later in the book. Something bad happens to the dog, a lesson learned early from childhood books. The animals in those stories often die, often in bad ways. Old Yeller, the red pony. And even when they don't die, even when they're not just alive but happy at the end, they suffer, often badly. Often they are put through hell. Black Beauty, Flicka, White Fang, Buck. The autobiography of Beautiful Joe, based on the life of a real dog and abounding in scenes of cruelty, begins with his brute owner slicing off Joe's ears and tail with an axe. No doubt, like many other readers, I remember crying over these books, never so hard as over poor Joe, yet never regretting having read them. Is there anything more compelling than a story about a child and an animal who bond? When I first knew I wanted to write, I was sure this was what I would write about, but I never did. When people are very young, they see animals as equals, even as kin. That humans are different, unique, and superior to all other species. This they have to be taught. Children fantasize about a world populated solely by non-humans. I like to pretend that I was some kind of animal, a cat or a rabbit or a horse. I would try to communicate through animal sounds rather than speech, and refused to eat with my hands. At times I kept this up for so long and with such conviction that it became cause for parental concern. A game, but at the core of it, something dead serious, a trace of which has been carried into adulthood, the wish not to be part of the human race. Something bad happens to the dog in Milan Kundera's novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. The dog is given as a pup by the main protagonist, Tomas, to his wife, Teresa, for the very same reason we are told that he married Teresa, to make up for the pain and humiliation his incorrigible womanizing causes her. Though female, the pup is whimsically named after a male character in another novel, Anna Karenina's husband. Karenin the dog hates change, loves being in the country where he makes friends with a pig, and after developing terminal cancer is put to sleep. Karenin and Teresa are devoted to each other. Reflecting on their pure and selfless bond, Teresa concludes that such love is, if not bigger, nevertheless better than the corrupt, fraught, eternally disappointing and compromised thing she has always had with Tomas. Idyllic is how Kundera describes human relationships with animals. Idyllic because animals were not expelled with us from paradise. There they remain, untroubled by such complications as the separation of body and soul. And it's through our love and friendship with them that we are able to reconnect to paradise, albeit by just a thread. Others go further. Dogs are not merely untouched by evil, they are celestial beings, angels incarnate, furry guardian spirits sent to watch over and help people live. Like the deification of cats, this belief is all over the internet and growing. It makes you wonder about people, I mean. Something very bad happens to a lot of dogs in Disgrace. The question persists, why won't David Lurie save the one, a mutt that has clearly come to love him and for which he in turn feels a special affection? Why can't that dog, a good dog, crippled but still young and apparently sensitive to music, be spared the fate of all the other unwanted dogs destroyed at the animal welfare clinic? Why, instead of keeping this one dog, does Lurie insist on sacrificing it? Remember Agent Starling in The Silence of the Lambs telling Hannibal Lecter how, as a little girl living on her uncle's ranch, she had desperately wanted to save the lambs from the spring slaughter. How she picked up one lamb and tried to run away. I thought if I could save just one, but he was heavy, so heavy. In the end, like Lurie, she could not save an animal marked for death, not even one. We know they think, but do dogs have opinions? Kundera makes much of the fact that, unlike us, animals don't feel disgust. I'm not so sure about this. Not even cats? But the dogs are not critical or judgmental is undeniably a big part of what endears them to us. This is what made educators think that having kids with reading problems read aloud to dogs was a great idea. Also, perhaps why performers like Laurie Anderson and Yo-Yo Ma have reported looking out at their concert audience and fantasizing that it's all dogs. Gratitude. I don't believe people are imagining it when they attribute this feeling to their rescue dog. I often feel that Apollo is grateful toward me. I want to know if he looks forward to things. She'll be home soon. Can't wait to eat. Tomorrow is another day. Even more, I want to know how he remembers the past. Does he have yearnings, regrets, sweet, sweet memories, bittersweet ones? With senses as keen as theirs, why couldn't dogs have Proustian moments? Why couldn't they have eureka moments, epiphanies, and so on? Do you talk to Apollo? My therapist asks. Well, yes. To encourage bonding, it is recommended that people talk to their dogs, which seems to come naturally, though my guess is people are now doing it less and less thanks to our attention-devouring devices. I once heard a stranger in agitated conversation with her pug. And I suppose it's all my fault again, isn't it? She said. At which I swear the dog rolled its eyes. What do you talk to him about? The therapist wants to know. Mostly, I seem to ask questions. What's up, pup? Did you have a nice nap? Were you chasing something in your sleep? Do you want to go out? Are you hungry? Are you happy? Does your arthritis hurt? Why won't you play with other dogs? Do you want me to read to you? Do you want me to sing? Who loves you? Do you love me? Will you love me forever? Do you want to dance? Am I the best person you've ever had? Can you tell I've been drinking? Do these jeans make me look fat? If we could talk to the animals, goes the song, meaning if they could talk to us. But of course, that would ruin everything. Thank you. Thank you very much. I should have said, though, most of you know when I mentioned Disgrace, that I was talking about the novel by J.M. Coetzee, of course. All right, so again, thank you for listening. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be very happy to try to answer.
Hello.
Hi.
So I have not read your entire book, but from listening, it sounds like it's very essayic, which is probably not a word, but it's a word now. What did you, as you were writing this, what did you notice about the relationship between essay and fiction? Was it a different mode for you? Was there?
Well, I don't.
It's an obvious relation. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
Oh yeah. If you, I don't think I noticed anything particularly new about the difference between the two forms while I was writing, but I did. You know, I've no problem with that word that parts of the novel are essayistic, because they are, and what I saw, the possibility that I saw in this book, in this particular narrative and way of telling the story, was a possibility of making a kind of hybrid book that had there was elements of fiction, but there are also there was the phrase I like is from the Spanish novelist Javier Marias, who his phrase was literary thinking, and he said what he said, what you find in my novels, he said, and in other works, is that you have a story, you have characters, and so on, and the story goes on, but the author and the narrator feels free to stop at any point and digress. And in some cases, it could be a meditative digression. In other cases, it could be a rant, and that was very much. You know, I actually, it's not something I planned beforehand. Like, I am going to write a book that has the two forms. But as I was telling the story, I realized that would work for this particular book.
Thank you. Who was the author again that you just mentioned?
Marias.
Ah, okay. Thank you. As someone interested in like writing hybrid fiction, this is really helpful. So,
yes.
Hi, I loved the book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for it. And I thought the premise was just really interesting, just from the get-go. And I was wondering how you came up with the idea for the book.
Like which idea? Like,
well, the beginning portion where her really great friend, commits suicide, and then she's kind of burdened but happy about this dog.
Yeah, it's there. There are two things. First of all, like in a general sense, I had it on my mind about writing about suicide because I had come to a point in my life where I knew that I had several friends who had come to this place of accepting that suicide was in the offing somehow. I mean, they weren't threatening it. They were not really asking for help at the moment, but they just had this idea that this was how their story was going to end, that it was perfectly likely that was how they would go out of this world. And it struck me as really significant. I had actually just finished the book when one of those people did commit suicide. So, and so that was on my mind. And then because I do love animals and they were such a passion from the beginning of my life, I've always wanted to write something where an animal was a major character, particularly a dog, because dogs make the best characters, I think, in a story about humans and animals, or one of the best. And then because I've spent so much time, I mean, as a writing, reading, and teaching, writing and reading, I wanted a place to talk about that. But in fact, what had happened was that I was supposed to join the rest of the BU faculty for a faculty reading one year. And because there were several of us, they said, we only want you to read for 8 to 10 minutes. So I thought, well, I want to read something new. It doesn't have to be complete, so I'll just start. And I started exactly where this book starts. And I wrote some pages, and I liked the response I got to that. And around the same time, I was asked to read a little bit later at the University of Maryland, and they wanted me to read for 25 minutes. So I thought, well, I'll just continue with this and say, this is from a longer work in progress that I'm, and really just, linearly, just like that and that. And then, by that time, I was launched, and then I just, brought it, I just kept writing, basically.
It's just a wonderful exploration of emotions, both the human and the animal, and it's just a great combination of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Someone else? Oh, someone's coming. Actually, she's just in there. Yes.
Sorry. You're obviously a teacher, and a lot of what I found most engaging in the book, but also most disturbing, were your comments about the students. How do you keep teaching?
Wait, what was the last part you said? How do you
keep teaching, given the students and what you say about them?
Well, why not? Somebody has to teach. Somebody has to do it. Okay. Well, because actually, I did start. I know a lot of writers who started teaching. Well, a lot of teachers who start teaching very early. I didn't actually start teaching until much later. I think I my first undergraduate class like when I was around 40. And then I didn't do that much of it. Certainly not as much as other people I knew did. And then just fairly recently, I started doing more. But I don't know. I don't. For me, it's not a. It is what it is. I mean, everybody who they know these stories. They know what the issues are. Some of it is certainly very, very amusing.
It's amusing, but also depressing.
Depressing. Why is it depressing? What's depressing about it?
Well, I don't want to do any spoilers, just because some of the students are so clueless and so
right, but but that's the way students are. I mean, that's the way. We were that way. I mean, a lot of it. If you remember your own. I can actually identify with that cluelessness.
Right.
But I guess I actually get along very well with my students. So we laugh a lot. We have a good time. I actually do, and then when they do the course evaluations, they're it's not like they think I'm a terrible person or a terrible teacher. So I don't know. It's not really a contradiction for me. It just is what it is.
Okay, thank you.
Another question?
Oh. So I was wondering, when you're writing, and you started with the women in Vietnam,
mm-hmm.
Do you write in a linear fashion the whole way, or do you then go to Apollo and then jump back to teaching?
Well, I actually always do write linearly. So this book, which might have a somewhat different form from other books that I've written, nevertheless, it's always the same. I start at the beginning, and I write something, and then I move on from there. I try to get those pages, it could be 15 or 20 pages or something, as clean and good and interesting as I possibly can before I move on, so that by the time I get to the end of the book is written. I mean, I might make some changes, but I don't jump around, and I don't make an outline, and I don't write the ending first or write the middle, and then it really is purely linear.
Thank you.
And I wouldn't really know how to, I don't think I would actually be able to do it any other way. Okay. Another question. Somebody's coming.
My older son was home at the end of December for the holidays, and whenever there was a slight lull in the activities, I noticed he had his head in your book. And so I said to him, what's the book about? And he said, well, I don't want to tell you too much. I said, why? You're clearly enjoying it. And he said, I love the book. It's amazing. And I said, what do you love about it? And he said, from the minute I picked it up, I felt like I don't know if I use the word narrator or not, but I felt like she was talking directly to me. And the entire time, that he really loved. And I'm not sure if that was something you were purposely trying to achieve.
That's great. No.
But that was what really drew him in. And he literally, every time he had a second, he had his nose in the book. It was cute.
That's
So,
a one. I'm
wanted you to
very
know.
happy to hear that. I think, I have there, I've read certain things where it's been mistakenly said the novel is a letter addressed to. But really think about it. Who would write a letter like it's not a letter, right? It's not. There's nothing letter. It doesn't say dear. It doesn't. Right. It's not a letter, right? And I think the misunderstanding came from partly because part of it, though not all of it, she says you. That doesn't really mean that the book is all to you. Much of it it has nothing to do with you. But I think part of the confusion came from the fact that I have said that I wanted the tone of a letter. I wanted the tone of the book to be as intimate as a love letter, which doesn't mean I'm writing love letters to your son. But it's the tone that there. It's that intimacy of voice and tone, I think. And I definitely did want it to be that sort of, you think of a lot like the hushed, intimate tone of a love letter. That's what I wanted.
Did you, as you were writing, were you thinking a lot about what that narrator is like, or as a person? What
I would think about what the narrator in two ways. One, what kind of thoughts would she have? Like, right, she's very isolated in the grief. She's not in a normal state, right? She's in a state of grief, but she's also, a little bit strange during this period,
right,
and isolated from other people. So what she does mostly is think. And so what would she think about? I mean, this is her life as a writer and reader and teacher. These are the connections that she would make. So that's, and I certainly, there were thoughts that I too would have, but not, not absolutely strictly speaking. Yeah.
And what kind of dog do you have? Do you have a dog?
I don't have a dog.
You don't?
No, I don't. I would love to have a dog, but I don't.
I recommend golden retrievers, but
Yeah, they're wonderful dogs. They are. They're great dogs. Yeah.
I was wondering if, in writing this book, if the poem by William Cullen, Bryant on Sanatopsis had any influence.
I certainly know that poems, but no, not in particular. But I can see why you would have thought that. No, I didn't. I haven't remembered that poem for a very long time.
I had learned it in high school.
Yeah, I will actually. I will now look up that poem again and read it because that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Hi. I really enjoyed your book. I thought it was excellent. I was wondering, when I first set into reading it, I didn't realize it was about suicide as much as it really is. And when I really settled into it, I kind of learned that. But you still managed to keep a really light tone, and almost like it was so delightful to read. And I never left feeling I needed to go cry or anything like that. And I was wondering if you set out to make it kind of that, not lighthearted, but a more like easy tone, or is that just how it developed along the way?
Well, it might be that it developed along the way, but certainly, something deep in me wanted that to happen. I just think it would have been, kind of unbearable if it didn't have any of that. And I always feel like I know this isn't strictly speaking true, but I do say it that I find it impossible to think of a good book that doesn't have some humor in it. And I think that one of the reasons for that is that no matter what the situation, no matter how grim, humor and comedy are part of the human condition. And if you're leaving it out, No matter what, you're leaving out something very important. So so I didn't think, so that these, while I was writing it, these moments of comedy or lightness or humor, whatever, they came to me, and I was always very grateful, and always thought you can't have too much of that. So yeah, so I wanted people to recognize it. I certainly didn't want people to think that it was a depressing book or a gloomy book, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question in proxy for a friend in Amsterdam. We chose this book for our book club and appreciated it very much. The question is, what influence did Rilke's letters to young poets have on this work?
Really, just what's in the book. I mean, it's something that I read a long time ago and have reread and have taught and have tried to teach, and that I feel, that I feel strongly about. But also, I'm very, very struck by how. But that's a book, that's a work of art that shows a difference between my generation and my generation of the students that I teach, because the people that I studied that book with, were reverent about it, and and now the students are extremely irreverent about a book like that. Not all of them, and not in a complete way, but many of them feel excluded by a writer like that. So anyway, so that's why I brought that up, about how different it was, for my students to read that book,
Right.
and what it was like for us.
And the influence is all throughout.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Somebody else?
Back to the dogs for a moment. So, to tell you where I'm coming from, I'm still grieving a dog who's been the love of my life, and I'm studying animals and human health. And I just wanted to hear, I imagine you did some research on emotional support animals, because you write about it a little bit in the book, and I was wondering if you think Apollo in the story really legitimately was an emotional support animal for the narrator.
I think he was for the. I think. I don't think he was. When we talk about support animals, we're really talking about the trained ones and so on. But like, we have bred dogs to be support animals. I mean, they are that way because we wanted them to be that way, and they do deliver. I mean, I was struck by, I was being in the Syracuse airport, and every other Thursday, well, I'm there every week to teach, just once, and then I go and come back. All right, every Wednesday I go and I come back out there. So every other Thursday night, a woman comes by with Ellie, who is a golden retriever that she then walks around this fairly small airport and asks people if do they need a hug, kind of thing, right? And I was so impressed to see this, because I've never seen that. I do know that, I think there's some major airport that has like 25 support dogs and 1 support cat. And I can't help but think, that must be some cat. Right? That is some cat. All right, so, but then I thought, so she brings the dog over, and then as I'm petting the dog, I thought, okay, what's wrong with this picture? And what it was the dog is completely bored. Do you know what I mean? The dog is totally affectless. The dog might as well be a stuffed animal. The dog is completely bored. The dog is looking over here or whatever, just being extremely patient. And I realized, but this isn't what you want. You want the dog to respond to you. You want the dog to be happy to see you, and then you have to create a needy support dog. So I wasn't sure then what these support animals were really like. Because as I say, they're just sort of like breathing, panting, stuffed animals. They don't really relate. They don't even make eye contact, and it just struck me as very strange.
Yeah, I would say that that's wrong. It was well intentioned, but it's often about the person rather than the animal. And when
Maybe the dog was bored with me. It was my fault.
Truth.
It's all my fault again.
With a true therapy dog, it would
relate.
They would want the dog has to enjoy the work.
But what if they don't? How do you get them?
Then
How do you get them to enjoy
that's
it?
different than an emotional support animal for someone who is depressed and needs an animal in their housing.
Right, that's different. Right, but then it's their dog. Right. That's what I meant.
There are lots of distinctions. Right, we don't have time to go into.
Right, if you have your own support, that's a whole other thing. But one that is just kind of trained to be completely calm, not to bite, not to bark, whatever. It just seemed very bored, as I said. And then that was kind of a revelation to me But as I say, I think yes, I do think he ends up being an emotional support to her. He's not like an emotional support dog. He's just an emotional support, But he does his. But it's not like he sets out to be that.
Right.
Right.
It was beautiful. I
appreciate
it.
Thank you. Another question.
I don't have a question. I could just share something. I've been taking care of Cosmo, this dog that comes around here. Let me see if we can get a
Comes
picture.
around here.
Yeah. So anyway, the point is he's a neat little doggy, and I walk him near AU, and in more recent times, I've been taking care of him 6-7 years now. I take him on campus, and there's just so many of these students who are just dying for emotional support because I guess first time away from home, they're away from their animals, they're away from their family, whatever. And it's just like, wow, they go nuts for Cosmo. And Cosmo's a cute little doggy, but it's just like, I realize how important it is. And there's so many places they say, oh, you can't have animals, but yet everybody wants them. And about the dog who's a little bored, I mean, that's his job. So he might look bored, but it's like without his job, he
might be really bored.
How would he feel? It's just like I hear they get rid of horses in New York City. I'm like, well, what are those horses? They like their job,
Well, it's true. It's like but that was kind of the way this dog looked. Ellie looked like it's a job, It did,
And just like the barking. I mean, this dog still barks at just when things are coming around to scare them away. It's like every day they're doing their job. It's with the mailman because he walks away, and so they figure they're doing their job, So they love having a job.
All right. Any other questions or comments or stories to share about? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Thank you very much.